Hi, I'm Mike Gridley, and welcome to PowerBoat Television.
Hey, whoa, that's my job now. Hi, I'm MCMILLIN, and welcome to PowerBoat Television.
I still got it.
If you're like me, you have a tough time not craning your neck and staring when you see a beautiful classic or antique boat float past. These incredible works of art and craftsmanship have shaped the history of recreational boating as we know it. Every single antique boat has a story to tell. Today on PowerBoat Television, we are in Port Carling, Ontario on Lake Muskoka, where it's National Vintage Boating Day. We're gonna go inside some of these boats to hear their stories firsthand.
This is the year, unfortunately, due to COVID, we had to cancel the ACBS vintage show in July, but it would be in Gravenhurst. So the idea this year was to celebrate vintage boats and get on the water and use them and do a parade. So starting with that, we expanded it. Let's create a national vintage boating day and keep going forward. So we have 2 parades of vintage boats, wood and classic fiberglass and everything going on here in Muskoka out of Port Carling. One on Lake Muskoka, one on Lake Rosso. But there's also other events taking place in Gloucester Pool and in the Kawartha Lakes area on the same date here on the 8th. The other groups that are involved elsewhere in the province are the Trent Severn Antique and Classic Boat Club and the Maple Leaf Antique Outboard Club. So we've got a lot of people that are interested in vintage boating that are on the water having some fun today. You'll see a range of everything from some really wonderful long deck launches that go back to the 20s and 30s, right up to fiberglass Donzi. So with our organization, you can be a member and take part in the shows and all that with a boat that's 25 years or older, whether it's fiberglass, wood, aluminum, whatever the case may be. This was the center of cottaging for a lot of wealthy people, whether they came from Toronto or came out of major American cities and came up here by train and used the steamers like the Seguin and all that to get around to their cottages. As the wealthy cottagers spent more time here, they started to commission locals to build boats for them. So whether it was Shields or Minette, whether it was Duke, Gravette family, quite a few names, Johnson, over the years, some absolutely wonderful boats were built here. Built in Port Carling, built in Gravenhurst, built in Bala. Port Carling, certainly the hub, so there's a tremendous history. And one of the things with all these wonderful old boats here is with boathouses of Muskoka, a lot of them were kept indoors and survived, so that started it.
As Mike mentioned earlier, it's not just classic wood that's populating a lot of these antique shows anymore. There's tons of great fiberglass boats. We're going to take a look at a couple of them in detail.
Yeah, the boat, my son Jeff found it on Kijiji way back in 2007. My father-in-law, Jeff, and I drove from Whitby down to Charleston, South Carolina, picked the boat up. My wife, Margie, and Kate said, pour some old gas over it and burn it. It was really, really, really bad. The boat was made in Long Beach, California by PowerCat, and it's called a PowerCat Bahama. The boat is a 16-foot. It's very, very beamy. It's 8 foot wide for racing in the ocean. And the PowerCat got its racing start from racing from Long Beach, California, up to Seattle, Washington, and back in the 60s. There's no subfloor. The floor is actually the bottom of the boat. So when you feel the water pounding, like the water's right below your feet. The outboards are twin 1961 Mercury DR direct reverse 800s, which is 80 horsepower. During the 2006 Toronto Boat Show, I had an elderly gentleman come up to me. He says, well, I think you should come to my barn in Aurelia and pick up twin white 6-cylinder Mercs, and one's counter-rotating. And of course, he had me at counter-rotating. They were a special build from Mercury, and that action counter-rotating lifts the back of the boat up. So a counter-rotating pair is absolutely unbelievable to find. So I had a restoration done in 2007. The deck was separated from the hull. Another friend of mine in the Antique Boat Club restored it and painted it. Jeff and I rigged it with the gauges and the steering and mounted the motors. Well, it took me a while to learn to drive it because it's so unique. And of course, there's no gear shift with a direct drive motor. You know, you turn them on and you're gone. The physical weight of the driver and the motors and the beaminess of the boat, you never feel unsafe in it.
Every antique boat has a story, which makes owning them even more meaningful, especially when you have the chance to share that story with other collectors and members of the Antique and Classic Boat Society. Another antique boat we spent some time with today has a modern twist to its story, and it belongs to a very familiar face.
People get introduced to it all different ways. We had done the show and we're wrapping up in what was called the Field of Dreams, where everybody would go and buy a restored boat or look for a hulk to restore. We were in between boats. We just sold our cruiser that was on the show so much, looking for a trailer boat, and walked around the corner and my wife pointed at this restored Sunflash and went, "Look at that." So we bought it. So we've been involved in the antique boat community ever since. For a lot of us, we grew up with boats in mind that bring back the background. You're older with a Minette Shields, with a Gravette, with a Duke, whatever the brand of the boat was. Or you grew up with a Peterborough Cedar Strip or a Lakefield, or you had, like I'm restoring now, a classic 72 Checkmate 15-foot ski boat with a Merc Tower power on it. That's my era of boats when I was a teenager. This boat started life as a 1964 Gravette Sunflash, 17-foot boat. They built Sunflashes from the 50s right through into the 70s in a variety of different sizes and configurations. This was undertaken as a restoration by a couple here in Ontario in 2009-10. And the original boat was so rotten, they actually used it as a pattern. There was just not enough left there to restore. So all the original hardware, steering, gear, shift, all that came off the boat. A new boat was designed, but this is what they call a restored and modified boat. So it has had more rake, sporty look instead of straight up and down in the stem. There's a curve to the deck instead of flat. There's a bit of a tumble hone where the back of the boat's a little rounded in, so the boat's a little bit longer. It's an 18-foot boat now. The windshield's a custom windshield. The original power on this boat was a 1964 Mercruiser 4-cylinder with MR1 drive on it. This has been repowered with a 4.3-liter, 205 horsepower with an Alpha 1, so it's a 50-mile-an-hour classic boat. The community's expanded beyond the preservation of wooden boats to the preservation of all the great boats that came before now, whether it's a Larson from the 50s or a Glastron, whatever the case may be. A lot of great old J-Craft ski boats that were built here in Ontario. They have a huge following and are being restored on an ongoing basis.
Later in the show, we're invited to a friend's boathouse to check out one of the most elaborate collections I have ever seen. You will definitely want to stay tuned for this one. Back in Muskoka, celebrating the Antique and Classic Boat Society's National Vintage Boating Day, we were invited to a friend's boathouse to check out his collection of antique boats. And this is no ordinary collection.
I think it's been really important to collect boats from different eras and different types of boats, but I've also been fortunate enough to collect boats that are typically one of a kind, where there was only one particular one made of that sort. They really are an art form, sort of like a painting. There might only be one done. I feel strongly about the aspect of keeping the story alive and keeping the boats here. In fact, I really just think of myself as a caretaker. I'm looking after them in my lifetime as 2 or 3 generations have looked after them before I came across them. Eaglet is a 1927 Minette Shields. It spent all of its life on the Muskoka Lakes. It was actually up just at the entrance to Little Lake Joe. And it's a boat that I've had for probably 25 years. And it's absolutely an elegant launch. I feel very fortunate to have it. And in the case of Minette Shields, he was really known as the Rolls-Royce of boat builders. When Minette Shields built a boat, it was absolutely done perfectly. But Eaglet was a one-off at 36 feet. It was made with a raised deck to accommodate a larger engine. And because Minette Shields had built a boat for Henry Rolls of Rolls-Royce, that relationship helped Mr. Minette end up with things like a Rolls-Royce steering wheel and a Rolls-Royce dash panel. So those little finishing touches, I think, have really made a difference in what makes a Minette Shields boat above and beyond every other boat. Rainbow 9 is a very interesting boat that has a great lineage to it. It was first brought to Canada in 1934 by a gentleman named Harry Greening, who had won world championships as a Canadian racer. But prior to coming to Canada, Rainbow 9 was known in the United States as Packard Chris-Craft 2. And it was a boat that set a world record in 1925, was built in 1922, and was purchased by a gentleman who invented the Liberty aircraft engine, Colonel Jesse Vincent. And with 640 horsepower with a V12 engine, it runs like a bear. It's a great boat to take out. Curlew has great history as well. It was built in 1936. It was the very first streamliner ever built. Curlew was introduced to Canada by John Hacker, a very well-known designer from Detroit. A gentleman named Fred Burgess from Toronto, who had a cottage in Muskoka, wanted to have a boat built by Ditchburn. But Ditchburn was kind of shaky, in and out of business. He went to Gravette, who was almost out of business at that point in the 30s, and they built Curlew, being the longest, the first, the only one that was pointed at both ends. And it became such a success that that led to the hundreds of streamliners that were built right up through the late 1950s. So Curlew being the beginning of that whole era, to me, was a very significant boat. I'm particularly pleased that my daughter's been interested in the boats. Now I'm more enthused that her children are interested in the boats. And so it's become a great family event for us to spend time on the water together.
Clary is a 1920 Hutchison, and it was actually built and raced down on the Great Lakes. It's been up here in Muskoka for, gosh, almost 25 years. And I've been driving this boat since I was probably 10 years old. It's amazing to be able to go out and do it and enjoy it with my kids now.
And he was a kid.
And I was a kid. Clary's funny because it's not a Muskoka boat, but I think this has such a sentimental value to our whole family. So when my dad was young as a kid, his father took him to watch the Great Lakes racing circuit on Lake Ontario. So he actually grew up watching this boat be raced and just sort of watched and sort of followed where this boat traveled and who owned the boat, and finally had the opportunity to purchase it. And it was really sort of the first boat that he purchased and invested in, and that we all enjoy it. They don't sit here, we get out and we use them. So many of the boats people have at their cottages, the driver's up front, and so you've got all the power behind you, but in this case, the power is actually in front of you. So it makes it easier to pivot where the boat's actually going to go. I think people are pretty excited about the opportunity to see the boats, they know the boats. So for people who have been around antique boats in Muskoka for a long period of time, it's sort of like people who understand paintings, right? They know the history of the boats, it's neat to see them up close. All of these boats are out all of the time, they're out of the boathouse. They don't just sit here. So it's really great to be able to go out and participate like we did this morning and be able to take a few of them out of the boathouse. But it's also neat to see other people bring their boats around, and the camaraderie in the community that I think emerges around boating and around the lakes in general is something that's actually really lovely for everyone.
Well, Mike, first National Vintage Boating Day. How'd you think it went?
I think that went pretty good. We've had a short amount of time to promote it. For a first, this has been great. The plan going forward is to make this national, so if people are interested in starting their own where they can just get out and enjoy your vintage boats. We'll be putting information up on our website, acbs.ca. And we're also hoping to work with ACBS International to make this a North America-wide, if you will.
Well, it was really a treat to ride along with you and see some of these great boats in action in right where they were manufactured.
This one's not too many kilometers away from where it was manufactured, and it's been great. It's fun, Drew, to be back on the show after a little bit of an absence, and maybe we'll get to do it again.
Absolutely, I can't wait. Great to see you, and thanks so much for having us.